We think that this is all there is because this is all we've ever seen.
That's also what we aim to unlock with more knowledge and AI, to see more beyond our perception.
Now imagine that the same is true for systems like capitalism, democracy.
I still don't see the big issue if we would go down to 8 billion people, for instance, from 10 to 8 billion. What would be the disaster for humanity if that happens?
If Apple's going to play this card, they're probably going to position it like, oh, we're the company you can trust with your privacy because that's what the card they've been playing. And I don't know if it's deserved.
We have this tendency to look at 2026. This is what we've built. We have capitalism, democracy. It's all holy. It's all perfect. It isn't. Maybe there are better systems.
But the reality is that it's one possibility in trillions of other possible systems that we could come up with.
Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of the Singularity Service. My name is Patrick and I'm joined by Aragorn, and as you know from us, we are talking about everything new in the world of technology, innovation, exponential changes, what is coming, what it means, and what to do. We missed an episode 2 weeks ago. We tried to make it work, but it was very difficult. Aragorn went to one side of the world, went to China. We're going to talk a lot about that in this episode. And I went to, pretty close by actually, to the Ardennes, and went completely offline. We couldn't be more different in our approaches for our holidays for this time.
It was on the other side of the planet from where I was, so.
Yeah, exactly. I went to the Ardennes. It's so close by. You have the hills there. It was with the dog, and this was again a digital detox. Everybody knows I like these kind of things. Makes me feel more connected to what it is to being human, right? With all this AI, these virtual brains that I have everywhere in the cloud and on my desk here. It's good once in a while to do that. But there was one thing that I took with me, which is this huge motherfucker.
Dawn of Everything.
The Dawn of Everything from David Graeber and David Wengrow. And you talked a lot about this. You've been advocating, read this book. And it was on my table. And I thought now, yes, I'm sitting down in nature. Mm-hmm. What's the best way to look back at how it all started, etc., and get a different perspective, basically, on the time period before agriculture was started, right? And thanks for the tip, man. It was a very interesting read.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it took me quite a while to finish that book. So when you said that you actually got through, I think you said 1/3 of it in
1/3, maybe a quarter, something there.
I'm very impressed because although I really, really love this book and I was going to say alternative perspective on history it offers, but I think that if you phrase it like that, it might seem that there are different versions of history, and that's of course not the case. And on the one hand, you could argue that they cannot be 100% certain about a lot of the things that they claim, right? But at the very least, they make a really good set of arguments that the current view that we have of history is actually maybe not as accurate as we think it is, because it's very much, and this is of course, is probably nothing new to anybody, but the view we have of history is very much shaped by the prevailing ideas and ideologies of our own time, right? So later in the book, I don't know if you read about it yet, but yeah, I know that you read that they explain that the Enlightenment did not actually start in so much in Europe as that it was something that we...
Absolutely. There are stories about Indian philosophers, basically, that came to Europe and had conversations during the Enlightenment and gave new insights, right? This was not just only the French people sitting together and philosophize about how the world is stick together. Exactly. And that was a nice insight as well.
Exactly.
I can even look up a certain passage of that.
And what I find really fascinating about this book is that for the conspiracy people between us, they'll love this. If you haven't, and if you don't want to go and read the book, but if you would like to get an idea of the fundamentals of the book, you can also go and watch Ancient Apocalypse with Hancock. Because although in Ancient Apocalypse, Mr. Hancock, I forgot his first name, but he goes quite far. He says, well, there must have been a massive civilization before ours, and it was on the brink of collapse. And so they send out smart men across and women across the earth to preserve knowledge. This is quite far-fetched, and there is no real proof for this, but it's an interesting idea, and there seem to be some signals maybe before it. But the other 90% of what Hancock bases his ideas on is actually what Wengrow and Graeber deal with in their book, and they present really plausible, really realistic, proof for this and signals, and they go through all of that noise. And at the very least, you can take home from that our idea of how civilization came to be, where science started, and the fundamentals and the how do you call this, logical thought, reason, is not something that we came up with in the West. No, in fact, it is much older, and it heralds back to these earlier civilizations. The Indians in North and South America already had this as basically traditions, because they had maybe not democracy, but all the decisions in every clan and every tribe were made by talking about it at a public forum, right? They would come together every night, they would debate, and they required from each other to present rational arguments.
Exactly. And not like we used to portray them as monkeys, right? Before everything, before agriculture,
yes,
humans that lived then were monkeys. No way,
exactly.
he says. That's completely different. There were very complex societies that had philosophy, that had rational thinking, that had debates, and all these kind of things.
And
I have it in Dutch, but there's the Indian person that I talk about. His name is Kandia Ronk. He came from some tribe close to Canada, and there are some fragments from letters in there. And I have to translate because this is in Dutch. But he is then visiting some thinkers in France and is stating something like, instead of thinking about 500 or 600 different religions, everybody different from the other, you think that there's only one religion, the one from the French, the only one that is good, holy, or true. This is an interesting passage, right? From an Indian coming this way all the way to Europe and stating something like that. And the book is filled with those type of examples that resonate with me. I like it.
Yeah, I absolutely love that about the book. And man, what really resonated with me as well is because you might read this and you might think, well, that's an interesting look on history. But the thing that I realize is that, and this is something that you see in the Ancient Apocalypse documentary, there's so much proof that there were these incredible public works, like massive mounds in the Amazon, where there was massive infrastructure built on a scale and a complexity that we always believed wouldn't have been possible in that age and then in that time. So from that, we can derive that these civilizations were more advanced than we initially thought. And so our view of and this is what the book deals with, the view of the past, we look at the past and we talk about the noble savage, right? They were savages, and they might have been good eventually, but they were basically savages. But the truth is that it's much more likely that a lot of, advanced civilization, reasoning, science heralds back to much older age. And there's, just like we see, in everything, there's ups and downs. And so we had some peaks in these civilizations, and then it went down again. And then, so in Europe, we believed that we invented it, but really we just maybe reinvented some things and we took it to the next level maybe, but it was already there. And it's very interesting because it throws a whole different light on history. And this is what has really inspired me also to think differently about society. So when we talk about AI and robots now, and people say, well, what are we going to do if we don't have a job? What are we going to do if, we can't make money?
Exactly. If there's one thing that I so far took away from the book is that, like people are fluid, the society that we built is also fluid. And we have this tendency to look at 2026. This is what we've built. We have capitalism, democracy. It's all holy. It's all perfect. It isn't. It maybe there are better systems like that.
Hey everybody, it's me again. Aragorn, Mr. Metaverse. Now, you probably do know this if you're watching this, because hopefully you've been watching our podcast for a long time. Me and Patrick, every week we collect the most interesting news, signals out of the noise about innovation, emerging technologies like robotics and AI, and longevity, society, and the world that we live in. And so every week we push out a newsletter on our Substack, which is innovationnetwork.substack.com. And then every other week we publish this amazing podcast called Singularity Service, where we just have fun together discussing all of these topics, what is coming, what it means, and what to do. Now, on top of that, we also do some other cool stuff that you might not know about. So we started this initiative called Exponential Executives, where we have this special masterclass for top executives to learn them everything they need to know about the agentic AI era that is starting and how they can prepare for that and also get hands-on experience. We also set up vibe code masterclass.nl for professionals and managers that want to learn how to vibe code to also be ready for the age of agentic AI. And of course, we have our Innovation Network meetups 2 or 3 times a year, which we're organizing the next one right now. And we do our innovation dinners, which you can check out at www.innovationdinner.nl if you're in the Netherlands. If you're abroad, reach out to us because we do it all over the world. It's an amazing experience, and I wish you could be a part of it. If you haven't already, go, of course, sign up for our newsletter at innovationnetwork.substack.com so you'll be notified when the next newsletter goes out and our next episode goes live. That's it for now. Back to the show. Yeah, most people probably listening to this podcast will have at some point or another heard that, the spectrum of light that the human eye can actually observe is a fraction of the total spectrum of light. So what we really see of reality is very limited. And we know this, even though it's hard to imagine. And there was, of course, hundreds of thousands of years we didn't know this, and we thought that what we could see was all there was, right? That is why Marie Curie, I think it was, actually also got cancer, because she was working with radiation substances and she wasn't aware of it because she couldn't see them, right? But now we know this. Now imagine that the same is true for systems like capitalism, democracy, and such. We think that this is all there is because this is all we've ever seen. But the reality is that it's one possibility in trillions of other possible systems that we could come up with and build, invented them, explored them yet, or the circumstances weren't right for them yet.
Exactly.
And that is what's changing now.
And that's also what we aim to unlock with more knowledge and AI, to see more beyond our perception, right? So, our current
100%.
perception. Hey, but that was about the Ardennes, which was nice. But you had a way more interesting trip, and we didn't even have time to catch up on it face to face. But I have a lot of questions for you that I think are interesting. But you're now back a week, so how do you feel coming back? Now you have some time to digest it. What's your general impression of China?
Yes, like I told you in the prep as well, I think that what really... So last year I went to Japan, and listeners to the podcast will probably know. And I always had this image in my mind that going to Japan would be the closest one could get to going to a different civilization, or a different species, maybe even. And it did feel like that at the time. But going to Shenzhen, going to China, I felt much more like that. Much more. And I hadn't expected that. And so this is a picture of me on the first day in Shenzhen.
And is that the futuristic? Because if you look at the images outside, you see this future cyberpunk city almost, right? Is that the thing, or is it different? What is that? Why did it feel so alien?
So on the one hand, Japan was more cyberpunk than China in some ways, but that's because the reason there is not what you would think, is my current understanding or my realization. Because the reason that Japan seems more cyberpunk than China is because cyberpunk is based on Japan, right? Cyberpunk culture, the idea of what a cyberpunk future would look like, is literally based on Japan, because at the time in the 80s and the 90s, Japan was massive. It was the second most powerful economic power in the world, and they were literally recreating what technology meant. If you look at Blade Runner, you see Japanese everywhere, right? If you read The Man in the High Castle, it's about a future where Japan won the Second World War. And this is now no coincidence, because after Japan became so big in the 80s and the 90s, the idea was that Japan could have won the Second World War and could have been a power, the size of Russia or the US, and an influence like that in the world. And so it just didn't turn out that way, and now we have China. But that's why cyberpunk feels more cyberpunk in Japan. But the reality is that the cyberpunk we have, or the solarpunk, I would almost say, because look at the picture I just showed, you see lots of green. And this is something that really struck me. Cyberpunk is about technology and cities that are filled with neon lights and all of that, and there's that in Japan, in China. Don't get me wrong; we'll see that at some. But it's also, solarpunk is about greenery. And what really, really, really struck me so much was the amount of green that there is in Shenzhen, the amount of green there was in the city. It is so incredibly green. But it doesn't mean it's not cyberpunk, because, it's super, super cyberpunk. I mean, there's buildings like that everywhere, as far as the eye can reach. All the skyscrapers are like synchronized. Well, not always synchronized. They have synchronized shows, but you think you have to go to a special place to see this. But no, this was literally next to our hotel. And this wasn't even Shenzhen downtown, because that's Fujian, which was half an hour ride. This was one of the side hubs. Like in Amsterdam, you would say this is the pipe, maybe, So yeah, it's really crazy. And what really struck me is that as far as you can go, you can drive for hours and hours and hours, and there will be skyscrapers, and everything just feels super, super modern. Just to give you an idea, on the second day, we went to Engine AI robotics company, and first we had to go up to the 69th, and then we had to take a different elevator to go up to the 139th floor, which is where this picture was taken. You can see all the way to the end, because this is the shoreline. So to the left is Hong Kong across the bay. And so you see actually the same tower in the back that I showed before from the park behind it is where our hotel was. This is looking away from downtown. So this is looking away from central Shenzhen towards Guangzhou. And you see all the way in the end on the right, you see there's still skyscrapers on the horizon. It's just crazy.
Super impressive, man. Super impressive. Hey, maybe it's good to mention that this was a specific robotics trip, right? You went with all kind of people that are investing in robots, have robot companies. Most were all Dutch, I thought. Tell a little bit about the trip. How many companies did you visit, and what stood out?
Yeah, so we had, I think we visited about 12 different robotics companies, and we went to the biggest robotics expo in Shenzhen, which was the Fair Plus. And at the Fair Plus, there was hundreds of companies. The funny thing is, on day one, we went to Engine AI, and actually, I'm just gonna share this, and then.
This is like looking at holiday pictures. I should have brought some pictures from Ardennes as well.
Yes. So on day one, we went to Engine AI, and this is Engine AI, and this is literally the first robot that I saw. And of course, this looked super impressive. This is now their flagship product. It's a small robot, and it's crazy because apparently in Japan, it's very well known. And I only knew this company from last January, I think, or February, because then it's when this is their old model, and their new model is the T800 that went viral for, doing kung fu and breaking doors. And
did you see that as well, the T800? Did you see it live?
Yeah, it's also there. Maybe I have a video of it here. Okay, so apparently I didn't add that video to this album. I do have a video of it, but honestly, it's just a version of this one that's a little bigger. And it was very impressive. But the thing is, I thought that this was a really impressive robot, right? So after this, I thought, well, if this is the first one, it's only going to disappoint after this, man. Because look at this thing. And now, by the way, I have to be honest, this is all manual controlled. So there's two things happening. There's always somebody with a remote control, and they control the robot, and then they press a button for routines. So this is just a pre-programmed routine that it does. And it has no idea whether you're there or not. It will kick you in the face if you're not careful. But this was the first company we visited, and actually from there, I expected things to get less impressive. But throughout the week, it just became more and more impressive. Yeah, so we went to other companies, and they actually said, well, these companies like Engine AI and Unitree, they're just kind of for entertainment. So this is the Limix, and this was a super impressive robot. And it does a little dance.
Is that from Archibot or?
No, this is a different company, Limix.
Linux,
and this machine is super impressive. It's just super impressive. It's walking, and everything was just so good. And it doesn't.
And this one does see, or do I see somebody behind it with a remote control as well?
Yeah, but this one can operate. There is a remote control, but this one has cameras everywhere, and it can. Well, all of the robots do have technically cameras, but this one can operate autonomously on a lot of tasks already. Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, the most impressive one was this.
Okay. Can you ask it to do it?
Hello, Lumi.
I'm listening. What would you like to talk about?
Please walk forward.
All right, I will move forward.
So what you see here,
was not really a long walk, but
no, it wasn't a long walk. And you could say, well, maybe this is not so impressive. But to interact with this robot and have it respond in real time, especially the speed of response, was really great. This was their first model. This is an educational model, right? So it just shows, how fast this is moving. We haven't seen any of these robots in the Netherlands yet.
You talked in our prep also about the importance of education. Is this robot? What's the educational function of it? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah. So one of the most sold robots, because basically that robot I just showed you is the Agibot, is a robot by Agibot. And then there's another company called Ubitech. They're more familiar, but this is actually the model they sold the most. And I super regret not buying one, because in China you can buy these for 130 to 180 US dollars. And I was so stupid I didn't buy one. And in the Netherlands, they cost 1,800 euros. So in the Netherlands, these are 1,800 euros.
Oh
And
my God.
oh my God. So they're more than 10 times more expensive to buy here. And I should have bought one or two, even just for
Well,
my
one
keynote.
or two. Maybe you should have bought 100 of them.
Yeah. Well, obviously, if you want to buy in bulk, it's a different story, because we had to go to a market to buy them. But the thing is that I should have brought one of these for my keynote, because they're super impressive. They have a microphone, they have a camera, they have a large language model, they respond to your voices, they do stuff. You can hook them up to Claude Code. I could have one on my desk here and talk to it and have it, interact with Claude Code for me and stuff like that. And I didn't realize at the time that how impressive it really was, because I was just seeing it. Oh, it moves and it does some stuff, and I actually thought that it was just a toy, but it's so much more than a toy. Now, to go back to your question about education, what really struck me is that all of these companies, Ubitech, Agibot, they all have educational models. And in fact, many times their educational models are the first models that they built. And there's two things happening there. One, they sell these to educational institutions, etc., a lot in China. And then what happens is these educational institutions use these robots to train their students, to have kids learn to do robotics. So I don't know, because nobody told me, but it seems to me that in China, there's a lot more investment in education, way more than we have over here. Here we're always...
Oh, well, we talked about this earlier as well.
Yeah.
That they have, I almost wanted to call it commercial breaks, but if you're on social media or something like that, you get a break and you get educational information. It's
Exactly.
flipped the other way around, basically, to get educational information on your mobile device. And they do this with robotics as well. It's smart.
Exactly. Yeah, it's smart. So what it seems to me is that in China, there's this ecosystem where there's a lot of money pouring into education. And what this allows is that these startups can actually start as making purely products for education, because that is a market where they can get a lot of revenue out of, that allows them to grow. And that allows them to create a proof of concept. And while they're doing that, they create a foundation that allows them, that already preps the next generation of engineers, that preps the market, that preps, even the consumer in some sense. Because if you've been learning to work with these robots in school, then obviously you're going to be more willing to buy one later on, or to work with one, or to take one to your company, whatever. So there's this super interesting kind of dynamic going on between education and the startup scene, specifically in robotics. I don't know if it's like that for every startup scene, but it definitely was for robotics. And so the biggest companies, Uptech and Agibot, both became the biggest by creating, developing, and then producing and selling educational models en masse, right? Thousands of them. And now they're moving on to building ones for industry and other things.
Was there anybody there picking up on the fact that we don't do anything like that here in Europe, especially not in the Netherlands, taking the educational axe first, even for regular AI, right? We are all fighting to use no AI on schools and no phones on schools, rather than taking it as an educational source. Anybody talked about that, or was that a conversation there?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. So actually, I think that I only really came to this realization at the end of the trip when I got back. That's when it started to dawn on me. So I didn't actually really go in depth talking about this with the other people there. But I do believe that many of them probably at some level realize the same thing. And the thing is that I was, of course, the only non-robotics industry kind of entrepreneur expert there. And all of them were asking about educational models. Like the guy Raoul, who's the distributor for the Limix that I showed before in Europe, he said, okay, what's your educational models and how much are they? And, and this is the other thing. And this is, don't mean this in any way, in a bad way, but these people are there to do business. And that also means that they're there to make money. And so, for example, this Alpha Mini, the small robot, You can buy it for $180 there. Why is it $1,600 over here?
It's and the margin, thing is, right, or what?
Yeah, it's margin.
Or is it tariffs?
Yeah, no, it's just a massive
it's margin and tariffs.
It's yeah, well, it's a combination, but still, even with the tariffs, it wouldn't need to be that expensive. But there's a market for it, right? And people buy it, and people pay that. And it's interesting because that also creates a barrier, right? Because if these robots were 180 euros here, obviously, it would be way easier. Rufus, for example, with Oasis, could buy 100 of these, right? Easily. But because they're so expensive, he can maybe buy 2. And this is also super interesting because then on the way back with the whole team, they said, well, how are we ever going to compete with China? Because if we buy 3 of these robots here and start working with those in the Netherlands, it's like a drop in the bucket, because here they'll be working with 10,000 of these robots, trying to further develop them and learn and build models. So how are we going to compete? And then I was thinking to myself, well, that kind of starts with pricing. But I cannot say, well, guys, you should just, if you are the importer or exporter or distributor or whatever, why don't you just, cut the prices down to 30% of what they are to make it more.
Yeah, get them subsidized by the Dutch government or things like that. Or start producing these things on our own and get that knowledge in here.
Yeah, exactly. And this is but this is also challenging, right? Because at the expo, for example, and we wrote about this in this week's newsletter, actuators. Hands. Man, I've seen so many robotic hands. Clear,
but maybe it's good if you re-explain what actuators are for the listener.
Yeah, I was going to see if I can show you. Yeah, this is the hands. Actuators. Look at this, for example. These are hands. And for these hands to move, there need to be little motors that make sure that they move. And
yes, the muscle, basically.
Right, there need to be actuators. And the average robot has a minimum of 40 actuators. So here we have a DexForce robot playing a Chinese chess. And so whenever it moves, see, now you see an actuator. You see that elbow, that black elbow, that's an actuator because it turns, right? It gives it another one in the elbow. And so the average humanoid robot has at least 40 actuators. And these actuators, they decide how flexible it is, how fast it can move, and how much strength it has, right? So the torque, the Newton power on the actuators is what decides what it can do and what it can't do. And so actuators is one of the most crucial elements of building a robot. And there is apparently thousands of companies in Shenzhen alone working on developing actuators. Yeah. There's 30,000 companies in the Shenzhen area working on the primary level parts. So actuators, servos, cameras, all of that stuff that goes into building the humanoid body.
So here comes another question. We've talked a lot about Optimus and we talked a lot about Figure. So we have this Western point of view about robotics. Of course, we've seen them now. Yet you have now tasted them locally. How are they on par? Is the US still ahead there, or is it the other way around? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, I haven't seen a Figure robot, right? I haven't seen a Figure robot
only videos.
Live, only on videos. And so, but I was watching this video yesterday from Sorcery with Molly O'Shea.
1 hour video that's now coming out from Figure.
Yes.
Yeah. I've not seen it yet. Yeah. Is it good?
Yeah. So, well, yes and no, because she is the most horrible interviewer I've ever seen. She seems completely disinterested through the entire thing. It's really crazy. Like, I've never seen somebody so uninterested. But here you see exactly what I mean. He just pushed a robot, and I hope they will do it again. Yeah, here she goes. So she's going to push it. Look. But look at how stable it is. Look at how stable it is, and look at how well it recovers. I was really struck by this because I saw look how it moves. It's like, maybe it doesn't look like this, but this is super impressive. And when I compare this with what I saw in China, then there was such a massive difference. So first of all, a lot of the humanoids that we saw didn't even have legs. They have wheels. And every single company where they didn't have legs, but they had wheels, when I asked them about it, they said, no, we're working on legs. We're working on legs. And then I'd say, why are you working on legs? Because it doesn't necessarily need to have legs, right? In many situations in a restaurant or in a shop, it would be just fine if it has wheels. And they're like, no, it needs legs because it needs to be more human. And they never really had a good answer for that. And this is something that roboticists also say a lot, like, we don't necessarily need legs. But secondly, the companies where they did have legs, there was a massive difference between the quality of how well they were stabilized and how they would move from one robot to the next. So some of the
that
robots
makes perfect sense, of course. If you decide to put legs on it, then you have another thing to think about. How do you make it stable? So then you have to specialize in that area. If you don't have legs, you don't have to think about the problem.
Exactly. I think that apart from the actuators and the hardware, having a robot that is really stable comes down to how the software works. And the thing that Figure said, for example, in his interview as well, is that their robot is completely neural net. Bottom, top is all neural net. And what I saw in China, again, a lot, and that's why I even pointed it out before with the remote control, is that a lot of the robots there are not fully working with a neural net. They're not fully using AI to control everything they do. They're not adjusting to every situation. They are still...
That's interesting.
A lot of times
are they not wired on DeepSeek and all these advancements that they have? How's that connection? Did you not see that?
There's some, like the Limix that I showed you, that has a very advanced VLA, VLR system, language reasoning, vision, language...
that.
But the thing is that a lot of these robots, they're not there yet. And I think they are working on it, but this really struck me. So coming back to your original question, how does it compare to the Optimus? How does it compare to Figure? I think that the Americans still have the advantage here, just like they do in the other AI models, where they're just ahead in that sense. The thing that I notice is that if you look at the video as well from Figure, they're handcrafting everything. It's quite interesting. In the sorcery video, you see that every single robot, they upped production 24x, right? That was the newsletter of this week. Or last week, 24 increase in production. But if you look at how it's being produced, then you see that almost all the parts are custom made by hand in their factory by humans with machines. It's not a production line. And this is where Elon Musk comes in with the Optimus, because Elon Musk is already working on changing his gigafactory to producing robots. So this is going to be a massive advantage he has. So he will develop all the parts in-house to keep control, but ultimately he is already developing with the factory at the end in mind.
And he also announced during this last call that they were increasing the V3 version of Optimus, the amount of that will be released this year still.
Yeah, exactly. So that's going to be interesting, because now I don't know how Figure is approaching this, because their robot seems to me the most advanced by far, but it's also the most expensive and the most complex to produce. And I haven't seen any indication yet that they're really working towards, complete automation of production in the sense that they could push out millions. Now, Brett Adcock has said many times that is not the issue, that it would be fairly easy to do that once they have a robot where they feel that is the appropriate thing to do. So maybe he has a plan. He's a smart guy. He probably does. But it is at least a race between Elon Musk's ability to get to mass production versus all of China. Because that's the thing that I noticed there. They might be behind, but there's 30,000 companies developing parts and all trying to be the cheapest and the best to deliver them, and all trying to build them to a spec that allows them to be slotted together. Because what I saw from the robots is every robot there can have a hand from any of the other brands, because they're all already built modular, right? So if you don't have a good hand from your own company, but you build a robot that can walk and has a good model, then you buy a good hand from a company that built a good hand and you stick it on and it works.
Way more networking thinking and connecting in that way than the American approach. Okay, I build a company, all revenues for me, I'm the boss, I have the status. That's going to be difficult. But then, like you said, Elon Musk, he knows a thing or two about manufacturing.
Yes, and there's massive advantages to vertical integration. But on the other hand, if you're competing with 30,000 companies and billions of in investment and minds working on it, thousands of engineers, it's an interesting thing to see.
Absolutely. So this brings me to another, maybe a little bit deeper question. And we talked about this before. China has a long-term planning, right? They have this AI 2030 plan. Clearly, they cleared the way with robotics. They have these complete cities and lanes where you have all these robotics companies and fairs. On the other hand, there are also economic problems in China, right? There is property investment is going down. Private investment is going down. There's a lot of youth unemployment. There's an aging population. So now you're there. This is the key question. So is it a country in trouble, or is it on the rise, or how do you feel about that? And could you distill that from your visit?
Good question. I'll tell you something really interesting I noticed when I was there. I noticed that there's lots and lots and lots and lots of bicycles, and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of electric scooters.
1,000 bicycles in Beijing, was that?
There was more bicycles in. there was almost.
Sorry,
more
I just had to
bicycles
go
in
there.
Shenzhen. No, very good. No, but there's almost more bicycles in Shenzhen than there's in the Netherlands. It's really crazy. Like you see every 100 meters on the sidewalk.
I would have never ever guessed that.
Yeah, but the big difference is one, they're not personally owned bicycles. So in the Netherlands, it looks like a shit show because all the bicycles are different. Everybody owns their own bicycle, but there. Basically, they're all bicycles from these bicycle companies, and you can just pick one up with your Alipay or whatever, and you take it and you leave it. And there's thousands of them. But the interesting thing, and this is not what was interesting, what's interesting is that there's no infrastructure for them. And this is where the Chinese 30-year plan is interesting, because apparently when the Chinese started to plan their cities, they even planned for all the buildings to have LED lights and to look cool. But apparently they didn't realize that they might need bicycle lanes. And so the scooters and the bicycles basically all use, well, there are bicycle lanes in some places, don't get me wrong, but it's not nearly as well integrated, as well thought out as it is in the Netherlands, because the bicycle lanes don't have their own color. So it's literally for the whole week, me and the other people in the group tried to figure out what is the bicycle lane and what is the sidewalk and where do they differ. Because it's impossible to know. And the result is that the Chinese also don't know. So you'd be walking on the sidewalk and then you get scooters coming up behind you that are completely silent because they're electric and they don't have any sound. Like over here, they're required to make some noise so that you can hear them coming out of safety. But there they don't have that. So it's completely silent, and I loved it because you can hear the birds in the city and the air is nice, and all of that was super unexpected, coming back to my solarpunk remarks from earlier. But the same thing is that you're walking on the sidewalk and scooters come up and beep, beep, you need to get out of the way, and bicycles, and it's just one big mess everywhere because there's no infrastructure for it. And this is because they planned ahead, but they didn't plan for this. And so the question then becomes in China, coming back to the economy, what are the benefits of planning ahead? And what if there's things that you didn't plan for that still happen? And one of the big things in China, of course, now is that they had the one-child policy, to make quite a big jump, but it's the pattern. They had a one-child policy because they planned to not have a famine. They planned to make sure that you wouldn't grow faster than they could absorb. But now the result is that they're struggling with aging population and too little young people to pick up the slack in the economy. And when I asked all of these robotics companies, why are you building robots? The answer was every single time because of aging population. Because of our economy. We need to build the workforce of the future. To answer your question, how is the Chinese economy doing? It's hard to say. I don't know.
But that everybody answers that question in that way says a lot as well, right? Which brings me, by the way, to the next topic. But before we go there, I wanted to check if there's anything else that you still want to share about China, any insights or things that we didn't cover yet.
I think we covered everything on China that I can think of. I think the next few years is going to be very interesting to see where China is going to take things.
I thought this was interesting as well. This just dropped in the past days. This is an overview of the visual capitalist. Always great to have these infographics about the fertility rate by country, right? So China is indeed having a 1.0 fertility rate. You see it across the board. All the Western countries are quite low. Europe is very low, 1.4. In the Netherlands, I looked it up, it doesn't show on here. The United States, 1.62. But then Africa is kind of booming, right? It is, it's just quite amazing. So there was some comparisons here, some footnotes in there. That, for instance, Nigeria would in a couple of years have more people growth than the entire European Union. So that is going to topple things in a completely different direction, right?
Yes.
United Nations expects to have the world population peak about just over 10 billion and then goes down after 2050, 2080, start shrinking for the first time in modern history without a war or a plague. Well, we don't know what's going to happen, but that's the expectation based on this.
Yeah, and so there's a few interesting things to remark on there. First, something that basically nobody knows that I ever talked to, but as a future historian specifically, I think this is a very nice place to insert this, is that 150 years ago, and this is what most people don't know, 150 years ago, almost 25% of the global population was European. That is a massive amount of people, right? Back then, less than 10% of the global population was Black, African. Yes? And that includes the African Americans, the descendants of the slaves, etc., in Northern America, right? So there was 2 white people for every Black person in the world. This is hard to imagine today for people, hard to understand, but that was the reality. And that was a result of the massive population explosion in Europe that resulted from the Enlightenment and the scientific method and the discovery of penicillin, etc., etc. And this is why Europeans en masse went to the United States and Canada, because Europe was basically growing so fast, and this is what China tried to prevent with their one-child policy. Europe was growing so fast that it didn't have enough food. That's why the Irish had these famines, right? This was horrible. And so this is what happened in Europe. And now we're 150 years further, and China basically already kind of went through a spurt like that, but they basically did the one-child policy and they kind of put the brakes on. And so now they're already through it. And here we have Africa. And this is also why you're seeing in the world today, and this is a little bit of a politically, of course, sensitive topic, but this is why there's mass migration out of Africa. It's the same reason that the Europeans left Europe 150 years ago.
And they also don't have the food, right?
And they also don't have the food.
No.
That's right. Yes.
There's another thing that you're not mentioning here, but you took it in a little bit different direction. What I was thinking about here, we talk a lot about longevity, right? If every time you see an article like this, people panic. Elon Musk is also one of the panickers about fertility rate. He's kind of saying, well, we should make more babies, literally, is what he says most of the time. And that might be true, but I'm thinking about 2 angles. First of all, humans were always necessary to keep the economy flowing. We were our own clock in the wheel to get productive.
Yep.
That is changing with the whole robotics move. But also we live longer. So we don't have to replace every generation, and we are confronted with a big issue if we don't replace. So we get more generational overlap, if you will. And on third, still don't see the big issue if we would go down to 8 billion people, for instance, from 10 to 8 billion. What would be the disaster for humanity if that happens? I personally do not see that. That is still...
Yes, I think you're touching on, and I was already, that was the second point I wanted to make, so it's perfect that you did it. One, the projections also from the World Health Organization and the UN, etc., on global population growth and development, all of them completely ignore longevity. And I would argue that is one of the most fundamental, important developments of the moment. Dr. David Sinclair has now proven in the last 2 months that rejuvenation is possible. At very least, some organs can be rejuvenated. Like the eye has now been rejuvenated. Somebody with an old eye basically had their eye returned to a very young state. And in the process, it was basically healed from all of the ailments that this person had, and loss of eyesight as a result of old age, because most ailments are a result of aging, right? So can be healed. So that means that it is extremely likely that our longevity is going to go up really significantly. And that's a great point you make, because that means that we will not have as many children, but we'll also not lose as many people.
But there is a downside in that. Because the age pyramid that we will then have will be bigger and bigger on the top. More and more people will get older and older and older. and
but
what
it doesn't
will they
matter.
consume.
But it
And not so much new young people will arrive on the scene, and that might cause future problems that I cannot oversee yet. But I'm hoping for more wisdom, right? All the people are wise. If you
Well, my view on this has always been that whenever we write in fantasy or even in science fiction about wise species or races or civilizations, we always depict them as being very long-lived, right? The elves live
Right.
1,000 years, and they
Exactly.
only have one child every 200 years, but they live 1,000 years, and that's why they're very wise, and they're more in touch with nature, and they're more aware of their place in the world and how they relate to everything else.
and some guy called Aragorn is also 1,500 years old, right, or something like that.
I think he's 250. Yeah.
250. There you go.
Because he's a Numenorian, so basically he's immortal, and he gets to pick his own time of death, and he decides it's okay after 250 years. But yeah, and it is funny because I think that is a metaphor that will be true for our world. And so on the one hand, you said there will be a lot of older people, but what does old mean when you can go back into a young body?
Exactly.
Right? If you can get your neuroplasticity back, right? Meaning that your brain, again, is much easier capable of dealing with change and adapting new ideas and new ideologies, then maybe we still get young people, because people will basically go into this rejuvenation cycle and go from old to young to old to young to old to young. But they will retain all of their knowledge. So it will be different from having completely kids, and kids will probably take a much more special place in society because there will be less of them. And their
you're saying
period in
something
life
super valuable. The whole concept of something old or an age pyramid becomes irrelevant if you have
Exactly.
longevity. The whole age
Exactly.
pyramid is not, yeah.
No, exactly. You could be working somewhere with a guy that's 150 years old in the body of a 20-year-old. So yeah, I don't know how that's going to play out, but what I do know is that it is going to happen. And so this changes the whole dynamic. Now, the only point to make is that the reason Elon Musk is so afraid of population collapse is because from all the models that we ever have had and all the examples that we've seen in the world, we have seen that once population collapse completely kicks in, it has been almost impossible to recover from it.
Then again, also from that perspective is where technology can help. Also very unpopular, but maybe we can conceive humans or beings or in a different way, right? It doesn't have to be in the traditional way.
Well, there's that. And then, of course, there's the idea of a new frontier, right? Generally speaking, when there's a new frontier, this leads to migration and then an increase in fertility and child, how do you say this, production?
Yeah. Child production. People making babies, indeed.
Exactly, people making babies. So it is very interesting. And for this, I highly recommend anybody listening to this podcast to go and watch For All Mankind on Apple TV. It's an amazing series that plays on an alternate timeline to our own world, where we discover some things and we end up going to the moon and Mars much earlier. And exactly this is the thing. So what you see is that what you probably could see maybe is that if we go to the moon, like Elon Musk is now planning, and we get a moon base, and we go to Mars and we get a Mars base, and we start really building there, that the people that go there, they have many more children, right? And that means that as long as there's always one place where humanity is growing quite rapidly, then all the other places can also ultimately be recovered, and we get fresh blood and the genetics are okay and all of that can stay okay. It is only when the whole of the world would see fertility rate collapse, and therefore that would lead to population collapse, and we have a problem, and then we turn into the Voltrumites or the Kryptonians or whatever science fiction species you can think of that basically made that stupid mistake.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating, and I'm sure we'll talk more about all that in the future episodes. Let's move to the next topic, because this is a topic that I wanted to discuss for you. It's not old news, but it is a couple of weeks ago arrived the news that Tim Cook, after 14 years, is leaving Apple. And was not leaving, he's becoming an executive chairman. And John Tannis, a guy I never heard about, by the way, is taking over the 1st of September. And this is an interesting chart that I have here on the screen, right? 2 eras of Apple leadership. 14 years of Steve Jobs, 344.5 billion in revenue and in value, and then the market capitalization of Tim Cook also in 14 years, 3 trillion, basically. Looking at the numbers, only you would say Tim Cook is the man. But we have completely different opinions about it. And if you look at the products, what actually was the innovations and the innovations that Tim brought to the table, you have a completely different perspective. And you have been extremely vocal about Apple, and I was wondering how you feel about this and where you think it will go from here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, everybody knows I'm not a big fan
You cannot
of
miss
Apple.
it. You cannot miss
and
it.
Maybe I should alter that statement right here and right now. I think that maybe what I've always been saying is not that I'm not fond of Apple. It's that I'm not fond of Tim Cook. I think that the man is absolutely atrocious for what Apple was and what it has become. And if you're looking at numbers, it looks amazing, seemingly. But what has the man really achieved? Now, there's two things. This is also something that's also interesting because it happens for US presidents as well. We tend to judge a president on what happens during their term. But the reality is that because of the inertia and the lag in the system, really what's happening very often is that you're judging a president basically for everything that is the result of what the president before him or her did. Right? And the same is happening here. The reason Tim Cook was able to achieve all of this is because he's coasting on the success of Steve Jobs. And all he did was optimize. And secondly, what Tim Cook did, what Steve Jobs literally explicitly said that he would never do, is something that has become extremely mainstream now in the tech world and in the big corporation world, is buybacks. And I don't know if you read the news this week, but just after Tim Cook announced his resignation or his leaving and handing over to Termes, they also said goodbye to their zero neutral cash policy. They instantly, I don't know off the top of my head, but I think they had they reported 45 billion in profits. And was the first thing they did? They used 40 billion to buy back their own shares. This is literally this is like giving yourself a hand job. I don't know how else to explain this. This is like the biggest fraud in modern history in finance and in what these companies do. You are using your own money to buy your own shares, to prop up your own price. So if you look at these numbers from Tim Cook through that lens, you can really ask the question, did he really do anything for the company other than create a fugazi of value?
Yeah, well, those are harsh words, and there's a lot of truth in it. A couple of things to react to it. First of all, if that statement that that he lifted on the success of Steve Jobs is true, then John Termes will have a difficult time. Because for 14 years, Apple has building an organization that is not good in exploring new things, but in exploiting processes, supply chain, and optimization. That means for 14 years, a certain DNA has appeared within the organization. People have left, like, for instance, John Ivory, that I want to talk about a little bit later as well with his new device. But good people have left the organization. Corporate survivors have stuck with the organization. Good luck, John Tennis, bringing that type of innovation that the world needs, including AI, back. So that's going to be difficult.
I wouldn't want to be John Turnus right now. I really wouldn't. I mean, this man can only fail, literally.
Well, maybe. But, well, there's a couple of things. You bought a Mac Mini. I bought a Mac Mini. Half of the world bought a Mac Mini. Who on earth would have ever thought about that? And what can Apple do with their chip and hardware capacity when everybody is desiring this personal computer back? That is an angle that could work.
Apparently nothing, because they're sold out, and they said they're going to be sold out for a while, and they have not really acted to this in any significant way. They were literally handed the opportunity of a century on a platter to get back into the AI race, and all they did was, we're sold out.
I did not know that, and it's hard to believe that they react like that. I'm sure that smart people are thinking about utilizing that opportunity.
Lots of smart people are thinking about it.
Okay.
Just not smart people at Apple that have anything to say about what they're going to do about it.
Okay, different angle then. It's something that I also found in favor. I just read that they are launching new types of glasses. And they stepped away from the Vision Pro. They stepped away from the price tag from the Vision Pro. And they're thinking about a new product that does not require a screen in the glasses. So it becomes a product that you wear that is AI enabled, that captures what you see, They think it will be costing around $700 US. That could be working, in my opinion. Yeah, I thought that was a smart move if you go into that direction. Drop the whole augmented reality stuff, take it as a wearable AI device. And that's what I was talking about John Ivey. We don't know what they're working on, but I think that OpenAI is also working in some kind of thing that it becomes a wearable and just registered everything that you do all day. I would be happy with that because everything that you and I do the entire day, we record all the stuff, we train our AIs on that, but it's a lot of manual work. If that kind of with your glasses works, if I just look at my screen and the AI can see everything, and also if I walk away from the screen, that will be helpful.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think for AI, like if there's one thing that you and me have learned over the last months about AI, it's that even if you have the same model unchanged and it's no longer just a chat companion, but you give it the context and the capabilities to actually take action with that contextual knowledge, it feels like it becomes 10 times more intelligent, right? This is what we see. And this is also what we see with the rise of OpenClaw. This is what we see with Hermes. This is where we see Claude Code and AI going, and this agentic AI. OpenAI, of course, in February already released Symphony, which is basically the same thing, where AI starts not just to do jobs for you, but act as an orchestrator to be your personal assistant and take care of stuff. And for it to be able to do that, it needs that context. So from that point of view, anything that allows your AI to be easily accessible through an intuitive, user-friendly interface like voice, that is an improvement. That's also what I've been trying to build. It's basically, it's like the wet dream of every AI enthusiast is to just have a Jarvis kind of, or Friday kind of AI assistant, Cortana, whatever you want to call it, that's always there, that's listening, and that basically takes action on a whim. And then secondly, we know that glasses work even without the display, because Meta has done a really great job with the Meta Ray-Bans. They're just messing up on some of the essentials, making the product still not really take off for people. Right? I think that if Meta had been smart enough to make their Ray-Ban glasses open source and allow you to use different AI models on the glasses rather than only the Meta models, which the Llama were super stupid, and now we finally have Muse Spark, and it's apparently a lot better. I read several reviews that the new Meta glasses with the Muse Spark are a massive upgrade from what we had before. Imagine if Zuckerberg had said, okay, this open source promise that I made, I'm going to take it serious. And our Meta Ray-Ban glasses allow you to hook in any AI model that you want, and you can talk to it. Man, he would have been selling millions already, right? He missed the boat on this, in my opinion. And if Apple can do that, then they got a winner on their hand. And if OpenAI with John Ivey can do that, they got a winner on their hand.
Yeah, I agree. But then for OpenAI, they have the AI with it. Apple doesn't. So if Apple has this perfect glass and we're still using Google AI or whatever other AI that you plug into that, the whole privacy promise that they have is also falling apart. So that is also not what we would like to see, right? Or which is not in favor of Apple. Let me call it like that.
No, because Apple, so this is the other thing. If Apple, we discussed this, if Apple's going to play this card, they're probably going to position it like, oh, we're the company you can trust with your privacy, because that's what the card they've been playing. And I don't know if it's deserved, but that's the card they've been playing, and a lot of people believe it. But they also just signed a massive, humongous deal with Google because they don't have AI. Right? And so Google Gemini is going to be the AI of choice on an Apple device, meaning that basically Apple's biggest competitor, in many ways, is going to be the one providing the AI on their devices, which means that they can't actually really promise your privacy is in good hands, because whatever the situation is, the data that you put in is not going to stay with Apple. It goes to Gemini. In some way or form, it's going out of the Apple ecosystem. And then secondly, Google also has glasses in development. We know this. I mean, I've had that video in my keynote now for over a year, right? They've been working on this for a while. And in fact, they have all the learnings all the way back to the Google Glass. So they have the AI. And for Google, it will be basically just part of a vertical stack, all integrated. Do you think Google is going to say, oh no, we're going to give Apple all the same capabilities that we give our own flagship devices? That's going to be great. No, they're going to do the same as with Android now. If you have an Android Pixel device, you get the vanilla experience, you get first access to everything, and then Samsung is second, right? They're going to do the same with Apple. So you're going to have an Apple device, and then you're always going to be second place. So yeah, I know.
So I think the conclusion is that it's going to be a tough job for John Turners. Getting back to it, I think the most relevant point is, do you have the right culture and the right people to make that pivot, to truly build AI, and can you do it? That is difficult.
And that is what I doubt.
Which
what I
also
doubt.
ties in another. Let's move to the next topic, and I'll put something on the screen that struck me, which I found it was interesting. So this is coming out of a blog. I think it was from Peter Diamandis, and it talks about curiosity. So if we go back to that culture, and if you move from a culture of exploration, which startups are, to exploitation, you lose one thing, which is curiosity. And this was an interesting take. They did some studies. This is actually a psychologist, Susan Engel at Williams College, and they tracked how often children ask questions. And then preschool, 107 questions per hour. And then in age 6 of first grade, 2.3. And when you go to middle school, nothing is left. This was a staggering result, right? And of course, you can look at it from different angles, but there's a lot of truth in this.
Yes, but there are some remarks to make, I think, to this. First of all, this is from a Harvard Educational Review in 2011, so that's 15 years ago. Second, it's US only. I think that matters a lot because the educational system in the US is in many ways very, very different from, for example, a lot of the educational systems in Europe, and probably even more so than in China. So I would love to see that data. Now I have no idea how it compares, but I would love to see the data. But I have no doubt that in general, this is a trend, even in China, even in Europe. And I think that is a problem because if I look at myself, I think for you goes the same way. You're not an ADHD neurodivergent like me, but you also have that superpower of being super curious. Always want to learn. You're reading books. You read more books than I do. You always want to learn. You always have questions. You always question everything. And this is, in my personal opinion, specifically right now in the age of AI, probably the most important skill that you could develop. And I'm literally calling it a skill that you can develop. You and me are naturally inclined towards this kind of thing. And that gives us a natural advantage, but it can be trained, right? It can be trained. It should be part of our education. Coming back to what you said before about AI in education, why is the whole discussion here is how do we avoid our kids from using AI? The question should be, how can we teach our kids to use AI to help them find the good questions and then find answers and then even better questions? That's what we should be doing.
Because what that graph that I showed, even when it's old, what it says about the educational system is that we basically stop kids from not being curious anymore. And even though it's from 2011, not so much has changed in that educational system. So we still have that problem. And it's not only for our educational system, it's also within companies. So let me look up a slide that I have in my deck, which I often show to executives, is getting also back to the Apple story, right? A lot of organizations, once they have found a product or have found a service, they move into exploit. And everything is geared about removing uncertainty. We have order. We have hierarchy, there's control, there's central control. And now it's time to move back to explore, a continuous exploration. There is uncertainty and you have to be curious. What will my new customer think? What will new regions think? How do I stay up with AI? That's more chaotic. You need a different type of people, or at least a more healthy mix. You cannot, if you have a company of 1,000 people, you cannot have one person on innovation driving that. That's not going to fly.
Exactly. There's so many patterns and parallels that spring to mind here. Like I've always maintained that neurodivergence is not a disorder or something. People with ADHD don't have a disorder. They're a natural mechanic, an evolutionary mechanic that provides every human population with a Bayesian, Bayesian distribution where there's outliers that are super curious because it's great to have stability and order in your civilization, but if a volcano starts to erupt, you need to have some people that have scouted further than, the horizon, that know what's there so that they can lead your people to safety. This kind of situation is essential. And the same thing plays here. Asking questions is what drives that. Do not want to know what's beyond the horizon, you're never going to go there and you won't be prepared when you need to go there. But if you do want to know what's beyond the horizon, you're going to explore and you're going to be much better prepared and you're going to have much better understanding of the world and what's in it. And the same pattern comes back when we talked about systems at the start of this podcast, capitalism, democracy. If you say it is known, we've always had democracy, it is known, we've always had capitalism, this is how we do things, and we never think about how it could be done differently, then, you're going to be completely unprepared when something disrupts that system. And that's exactly what's happening in the world today. But if you are trained to always question everything, if it's your nature to wonder, is there more? Is there something different? Can we do it better? And you go and explore that, then you're always going to be better off. And not everybody needs to do that, but a significant portion of our population, our society, our civilization should be geared towards that kind of thinking. And that's what we really need now.
Yeah, and that's also interesting. In the article is some tips on how to do that. And let me read a couple of those because I think it's important. Create information gaps on purpose. So, and there's a technique for that, right? So you, for instance, go into a conversation like we have, you do half of the prep work that gets you thinking in some kind of direction, and then your brain starts thinking about stuff, and then you end up with a valuable conversation and curiosity in each other's mindset, stuff like that. Second point, explore time. Very important. I know that you and I do that both a lot, and I literally have hours that I dedicate to research, exploring stuff. This is critical. And what you do very, very well, and that's why you are so eloquent in your speaking, you are able to teach what you've learned within 24 hours because you're so vocal about it. Either in our groups or on stage or whatever, you keep on repeating something that you just learned, and then you memorize it good. That is also a trick of getting more curious into things and memorizing then what you just learned and being curious about it and then diving deeper into that. So that's a big trait that you have.
Yeah, it's interesting because you said first information gap. It's funny because when you watch videos on AI and how they test AI intelligence, one of the things that they do is they take models or setups like Claude Code versus OpenClaw versus GDS, whatever, and then they give it a job, and then they purposefully leave out information. And then they want to see how does it handle that. And the better it handles the lack of information is an indication of the higher level of intelligence. So there you have that parallel. Then the second one, what you said to me, why I can teach things because I keep repeating it, is literally, what is that? That's reinforcement learning, right? And you do that by going out, trying new things, and then, getting stuck in that, trying it, failing many, many times, and then improving as you go. That's the way to do everything. And this comes back to a broader issue that I have spotted in many ways in modern society, is that we've come now to a point where the mainstream conviction is that we need to avoid all inconvenience. We need to get rid of all discomfort, right? I literally see, what was it? I saw this week something about kids. Oh yeah, I saw that in the greater Manchester or the greater Birmingham area in the UK, they removed a bunch of books from libraries or from schools, including 1984, because it was causing discomfort with the kids. This is a sure way to civilizational collapse. If you start doing that, if everything has to be comfortable, if nothing can be dangerous, the world will, people will just basically start to turn into amebas again.
Well, and that is just a matter of removing curiosity. That's basically what you're doing then, right? You take away any risk of pain, and your whole commute to somewhere else is always the same. You're never questioning anything. Nothing can go wrong. No, there's no pain. There's no curiosity either.
Exactly. I mean, Musk sometimes jokes about how he read Dostoevsky when he was young in his teenage years, and he said it was very depressing. And the same for Nietzsche and Freud, I think. Imagine if we don't do that anymore, right? This is some of the greatest thinkers of human history, of the greatest literary talent in the world. Dostoevsky and Tolstoy all write about pain, suffering, war. It's horrible, but it's so important. It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So how about we close it off here, Aragorn?
People have no idea because I need to edit this, and I realized before I always wanted to make the podcast longer. This is a funny thing. You can laugh on it. I always wanted to make this podcast longer. It's so interesting. There's so much to talk about. But now I'm the one that's editing it. I realized that I need to listen to it at least twice for the complete length of the podcast.
Now you want to make it shorter?
Properly edit it. So every minute that is longer means that it takes 3 minutes longer to edit it. So I'm good.
But it's that's not going to be a long time, right? So the AI's ability to kind of cut this and make videos of it is also increasing rapidly. So by the end of the
100%.
year, that is completely Claude enabled.
Yes, and I'm already working on, because apparently Descript released an MCP, or you can hook Descript into Claude Code. So I'm already trying to I already built a system where when I see a LinkedIn post with a video or Instagram, doesn't matter, I give it to Claude Code, I type /grab 4K, 2K, whatever, and then it grabs the video. And then if I type Reels after it, it will grab it, download it, then transcribe it, then it will automatically cut it into Reels. And so all of this is basically what Opus Clip does for a subscription. And I'm not saying that it's as good yet, but I built it myself in an hour, right? So imagine where we'll be 6-12 months from now. There's so many things you can do. Imagination is really your only limitation going forward.
What's not to love about this time period? So
it's a great time to be alive.
Exactly. So thanks again for listening or watching. If you see this on YouTube, if you want to track whatever we do with the Innovation Network, go to innovationnetwork.substack.com. There we have a newsletter that you can sign up for as well. Join the group of Singularity Surfers, become a Singularity Surfer yourself, and see you next time. As they say in the Netherlands.
See you later. Hello everybody, it's Aragorn here. And if you made it to the end of this episode, which clearly you have, then we want you to know that Patrick and me really consider you a Singularity Surfer. You're part of our community. Now, if you haven't already, that probably means you want to sign up for our weekly newsletter and our bi-weekly podcast on innovationnetwork.substack.com. That's innovationnetwork.substack.com. Now, of course, we're also on your favorite platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon. YouTube, doesn't matter, you can find us there. Another thing I'd really love is if you would leave us your thoughts on everything that we discuss in our newsletter and every episode. And of course, if there are things that you think we really should discuss in future episodes, make sure to leave that in the comments as well. We'll check all of them ourselves, and there's nothing that we love more than to engage with our community, the people in it, and their ideas. We really hope that you enjoyed this and previous episodes, and we really, really look forward to seeing you in the next one. That's it for now, and of course, like they say in the Netherlands, see you later.